Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, November 17, 2023. President Joe Biden meets Mexican President Manuel Lopez Obrador on the sidelines of the APEC Leaders Conference in San Francisco, discussing migration and fentanyl trafficking. President Biden says nothing is beyond our reach, in my view, if Mexico and the United States stand together and work together. The Defense Department holds a welcoming ceremony for the new Air Force Chief of Staff, at which the Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall calls on Senator Tommy Tuberville to end his holds on military nominations and promotions as a protest to the Pentagon's abortion policies. He says that it's damaging to the military's ability to make improvements now to meet future challenges. Retired U.S. General David Petraeus defends Israel's military operation in the largest hospital in Gaza, which Israel says is a Hamas command center. Congresswoman Becca Balint of Vermont becomes the first Jewish U.S. House member to call for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Congressman Michael Gast, the Ethics Committee chair, introduces a resolution to expel fellow Republican Congressman George Santos after his committee concluded that Congressman Santos broke several laws, including stealing campaign contributions for personal use. The U.S. Capitol Christmas tree has arrived, a 63-foot Norway spruce from a national forest in West Virginia. And the Transportation Security Administration answers the question, what are the biggest mistakes air travelers make? From Associated Press in San Francisco, President Joe Biden and Mexican President Manuel Lopez Obrador pledged Friday to work side by side to confront illicit fentanyl trafficking into the U.S. and to manage the growing number of migrants traveling north to the border between their nation. Biden's relationship with Lopez Obrador has at times been tense, in part because Biden's willingness to criticize Mexico on topics such as fentanyl production and the killing of journalists. And Lopez Obrador isn't afraid to snub the U.S. leader. He skipped a Los Angeles summit last year where leaders tackled the issue of migration because the U.S. didn't invite Cuba, Nicaragua, or Venezuela. He also initially said he would skip this year's APEC conference, but changed his mind. The two men were all smiles and compliments before the press on Friday. That from Associated Press. Here is President Biden.
It's good to see you again. We had dinner last night. I told you, you sat next to my wife, you were so captivating, I was worried she liked you more than she likes me now. I don't know. But thank you very much for being so gracious. You heard me say it before. Nothing is beyond our reach, in my view. I really mean it. When Mexico and the United States stand together and work together as we've been doing. We see in our security cooperation, we're working side by side to combat arms trafficking, to tackle organized crime, and to address the opioid epidemic, and including fentanyl, which when we talk privately, I want to tell you about my great conversation with Xi Jinping on that issue. And in our economic cooperation, we're growing our economies from the bottom up and the middle out. So not just the wealthy benefit, but all our citizens benefit from our economic growth. And we see it in our work to strengthen supply chains, including through the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity. And we're cooperating there as well. And we see it in our cooperation to address historic levels of migration. And I want to thank you, Mr. President, and your team, I really mean it, for the cooperation and your leadership in taking on this challenge. I know it's not easy. Together, we're taking a balanced approach that lies at the heart of the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, and we and 19 other nations have signed on to that agreement. So it includes enforcing our borders, increasing reparations, and opening a historic number of legal pathways for migrants. So I want to thank you again, all the things that are of consequence to us. I couldn't have a better partner than you. Thank you.
President Joe Biden meeting with Mexico's President Obrador on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, conference in San Francisco. President Obrador also spoke about migration and fentanyl. You'll hear him through an interpreter.
There are around 40 million Mexicans working and living with decency in the United States, which strengthens our bonds. And of course, progress needs to be made, further progress needs to be made to address the migratory phenomenon. We're working on that jointly in coordination, and we wish to thank President Biden because he is the first president in recent times in opening legal pathways for migration. In the past, there were no possibilities for people who needed to come to the United States. There were no legal possibilities open, and it is President Biden who opened up this possibility upon a request placed by Central America and the Caribbean countries. They file the petition, and after an assessment is made, they are allowed to enter the United States, which means that they no longer have to cross our country with all the suffering and risks such endeavor poses. It's a humane way to address the migratory phenomenon. And I would also like to express and to state that he is the first president in the United States in recent times who has not built walls. It is true, and we need to continue to support one another, so migration is an option and not enforced. We wish to assist the people in their countries of origin when they are forced to migrate. We are fully satisfied in holding this meeting. And as regards to drug control, Mexico's undertaking is to continue to support, so we do not allow the introduction of chemical components and chemical precursors to fentanyl, because we're fully aware of the damage it poses to the United States youth. This is a matter of humanism. It's an act of solidarity. We are sincerely committed to continue to assist at our fullest capacity to prevent drug trafficking, namely the entrance of fentanyl and other chemical precursors.
Mexican President Manuel Lopez Obrador through an interpreter meeting with President Joe Biden in San Francisco today, the sidelines of the APEC summit. President Biden closing out that summit with a leaders meeting and passing off the chairmanship of APEC to the next country, which is Peru. On this meeting with the Mexican president, this from Reuters, the bilateral meeting comes as the two countries are at odds over several significant trade issues, including Mexico's efforts to phase out use of genetically modified corn, a move that hurts U.S. farmers, and efforts to block U.S. energy investments into Mexico. The worsening of trade relations between Washington and Mexico City comes even as their economic integration grows. And this also from the Reuters article, Mexico overtook Canada and China to become the largest U.S. goods trading partner in the first half of 2023, reaching total trade of $396.6 billion as Mexico's automotive production grows and other U.S. companies shift supply chains from China closer to home. The subject of immigration has also been one that the U.S. House Republican majority is focused on, and Congressman Roger Williams of Texas, a Republican, spoke today to WBAP Talk Radio in Fort Worth about his bill.
Congressman, let's talk about your new border legislation stopping immigration functions until DHS can ensure that no terrorists can cross into the U.S. This has been a real concern. You had Christopher Wray the other day telling us that we don't know where a lot of people are that we're concerned about.
Well, we don't know where they are, and the ones that are here are not going to go back. And, you know, and the number is rising every day, but over 170 people we have arrested and captured that were known on the terrorist list. So we've got a bill that's bipartisan that's going through the motions right now through the House that basically says that to our Border Patrol, you don't have to process these people. These people come up wanting asylum or they want to be here for forever. We just turn them back around where they came from. That should be. This is a land of law. We need to adhere to the law. But this way, there's no processing. You come up, you knock on the door, we turn you back because we get too many people here we don't know about. We need to get a handle on that before we take others in.
Now, what chance does that have of getting through the Senate and then the president signing it?
Well, I mean, I think it's got a great chance of going through the House, the Senate. I mean, guys, this should be bipartisan. This is about the law of the land, for crying out loud. So, Biden probably, if it got to his desk, probably would veto it. But, we can't worry about what he's going to do. We got to do what we need to do and let him decide at the end of the day if he loves this country or doesn't.
Congressman Roger Williams, Republican from Texas, today on WBAP radio out of Fort Worth, Texas. House Republicans are proposing to add border security provisions to a bill that would fund the president's $60 billion request to aid Ukraine in its war with Russia, and then pass that bill as a single package. That's all to be worked out after the House and Senate come back after the Thanksgiving holiday. A welcome ceremony today for the new Air Force Chief of Staff, General David Alvin, was held at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. The Senate confirmed General Alvin on November 2nd, along with the new Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps and the new Navy Chief of Operations. A rare exception to Senator Tommy Tuberville's blanket hold on military nominations and promotions, a protest that he has kept up for almost a year against the Pentagon policy of aiding women seeking abortions when they need to travel to states other than where they're stationed. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall, at today's ceremony, spoke against Senator Tuberville's actions.
Thank you for the professional protocol team and the staff that put this event together today. I'm very grateful that, and hopefully we'll soon be planning several other events when the Senate confirms the rest of the 118 Air Force and Space Force general officers whose nominations are all still on hold. You're going to hear a theme in the remarks from General Brown and General Alvin and myself, and that theme is a sense of urgency. We are running out of time, and we have to make changes that we need to stay competitive, particularly with our pacing challenge. We need the Senate to act now on those confirmations, and we need the Congress to act now to finalize the FY24 authorization and appropriations. Time is a resource that we can never recover. General Brown understands this sense of urgency and reminded us of the value of time. Accelerate change or lose.
Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall at today's welcome ceremony for the new Air Force Chief of Staff, and you also heard him reference the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, Jr. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, explained in an interview with podcast host Kimberly Guilfoyle why he has continued his holds on military nominations and promotions.
Well, first of all, Kimberly, this is going on 10 months of these holds of admirals and generals, and I've hated to have to do this because I'm a military person. My dad was career military. I know that we need a strong military, especially when we have very little leadership in the White House and the Pentagon. We need people that's in our military that's going to be fighting and preparing and getting ready for a battle because, hey, our world is a disaster as we speak because of what's going on from our leadership. But that being said, we're getting a little closer. I got some things working right now that hopefully it'll work by the first of the year. I'd really love to get these people promoted. But again, this is about executive overreach. It's about a policy that's been in effect for 40 years, voted on by Joe Biden himself, and then trying to protect the American taxpayer for having to pay for anything to do with abortion.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little further. Talk about the Pentagon's, abortion policy and what Americans actually need to understand about how extreme it really is. I mean, they're using federal dollars to facilitate abortions. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, exactly. And what they did is after Roe Wade went down the next month, they said, well, we can't control what's happened in the states, but we can control what happens to federal employees. So they just went out and said, let's just make us up a policy. We won't send it through Congress like we're supposed to do. We're going to break the law, break the Constitution. And so that's what they did. And they said, we're going to give abortion travel, and we're going to pay for that by taxpayers' money. They can't tell us about the policy in terms of the abortion itself. You know, it's been rape, incest, or health of the mom. But we asked in one of our hearings, what month are you going to go by for the abortion? They couldn't tell us whether it was abortion after birth. I mean, these people can't communicate. They have no clue what they're doing. They're just throwing something out there. And then again, at the end of the day, Kimberly, 10 months we've been doing this, almost zero conversation from the Pentagon or the White House.
Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, with podcast host Kimberly Guilfoyle. She posted that clip on Thursday. The story from TheHill.com, Republican senators are laying the groundwork to vote before Christmas on a Democratic-drafted resolution to circumvent the blockade that Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville has placed in front of more than 400 military nominees. A Senate Republican aide said that support within the GOP conference now appears to be shifting toward changing Senate procedure if the standoff with Tuberville threatens to drag into 2024. Some headlines in the war between Israel and Hamas. This from NBC News. Israel is close to dismantling the military system in the northern Gaza Strip, the IDF's chief of staff said. He added that more of the enclave's regions will be targeted after the IDF urged residents of several neighborhoods in southern Gaza to evacuate. Israeli forces searched several hospitals in northern Gaza, saying they had found tunnels, weapons, and at least one vehicle. The IDF has so far not provided definitive evidence that Hamas command centers exist beneath Al-Shifa and other hospitals. And civilians in Gaza are at immediate risk of starvation, given that food and water are practically non-existent there, according to the UN World Food Program. That was all reporting from NBC News. General David Petraeus, retired and former commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan and former CIA director, spoke today about how Israel is conducting this war.
The uproar about going into a hospital, I find a little bit curious, because when we did Fallujah for the last time, we did many large cities during the surge in Iraq in particular, first against Sunni extremists, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Sunni insurgents, and then eventually in the second year, the Iranian-supported Shia militia. And in the case of Fallujah, the final time that we did it, very deliberately, painstakingly, the very first objective was to secure the hospital. And we did that for several reasons. One was to ensure that it was not a source of disinformation about casualties, as it was in the past when it was hung onto, when it was held by the extremists until the very end. And then number two, to make sure it functioned. And I hope that the Israelis will continue to do what they did on the first day when they entered, which is they quite visibly brought in incubators and other medical supplies and so forth. Keep it operational, make it what right looks like, get a corridor that goes into it, and treat the innocent civilians that have been wounded, injured, and so forth in the course of this fighting. Also, obviously, identify any of the Hamas fighters that are going in there and then take them to secured medical facilities, as we did as well in the case of those Al-Qaeda fighters and others that were wounded in our operations. But when you clear, hold, and build, that's a very big task, because it means you cannot clear and move on. You have to retain control of the areas, or the enemy will re-infiltrate behind you, especially if they can do it through tunnels that may or may not have been identified. Keep in mind that there's an element of suicide bombers here that is particularly pernicious, a willingness on the part of some of those in the extremist ranks to blow themselves up to take Israeli soldiers with them, either vest bombs or car bombs. And that forces a particular degree of caution that can be very, very challenging for individual soldiers. But ultimately, I think they're also going to have to go to the south. And so here, I think it would be very, very valuable, very important if there was additional big ideas that life for the Palestinian people in Gaza will be vastly improved after Hamas is no longer part of it, and talk about what they're going to do in that regard, and describe how, at least in the near term, they're going to provide for the people, even as they try to identify a competent, capable, and trustworthy Palestinian entity. That's what Secretary of State Blinken would like to see. We'd all like to see that. I'm not sure that that exists in the West Bank, much less willing to deploy to Gaza and be seen as arriving on the backs of Israeli tanks, or an Arab country delegation, or a UN transitional authority of some type. The problem with all of these, though, is that there's one mission that has to be performed in addition to the provision of humanitarian assistance, restoration of basic services, and oversight of reconstruction of the enormous amount of damage and destruction that is just to be expected. And we're seeing already in any urban conflict of the intensity that this is. That additional task is to ensure that Hamas cannot reconstitute. And again, we saw this happen with the Islamic State after our combat forces left Iraq and the Iraqis took their eye off it. A couple of years later, you have a caliphate. That cannot be allowed to happen here. The Israelis are very, very keenly aware of that. That's why I suspect Prime Minister Netanyahu suggested that Israeli forces might have to oversee security there at the very least, knowing that they don't want to do that. The U.S. is discouraging from doing that for obvious reasons. There's a reason they left in 2005. But you break it, you own it. Pottery barn rules or pottery house rules obtain here. That's a real conundrum. And so the sooner, I think, though, that even just the vision for the Palestinian people in Gaza, and by the way, this would also be the time to announce a vision for the Palestinian people in the West Bank as well. And inevitably, in my view, it does have to be a return to the two-state solution, given that there's absolutely no alternative to that.
David Petraeus, retired U.S. general and former CIA director, at a virtual program hosted by the Atlantic Council, focusing on the evolution of warfare. He also talked about the war between Ukraine and Russia. We covered it, and you can find the video at cspan.org. Congresswoman Becca Balint, Democrat from Vermont, has become the first Jewish member of the U.S. House of Representatives to call for a ceasefire in Israel's war against Hamas. In an op-ed published Thursday with Vermont Digger, she writes, "What is needed right now is an immediate break in violence to allow for a true negotiated ceasefire, one in which both sides stop the bloodshed, allow critical access to humanitarian aid, and move towards negotiating a sustainable and lasting peace, one that stops the deaths of innocent Gazans and leads to a near future where Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank have true self-governance and economic security, one that returns all hostages safely and protects Israelis from continued terror from Hamas." Part of the op-ed from Congresswoman Balint. She was interviewed Thursday night on MSNBC.
Every single member of Congress on the Democratic side that I have talked with in the last month, we all want the same things. We want the suffering to end. We want the bombs to stop falling. We want Hamas not to be in charge in Gaza anymore. We want the hostages back. We all want this. We are all in such pain. And I'm new to Congress, but I've talked with a lot of older members. They've all said the same things. This is the hardest moment they've ever been in because it is such a complex issue. It's been such a complex issue for so long that there are no easy answers. And we have gotten so hung up on trying to get the exact right words in this moment to express ourselves that we're not saying what it is that we all have in common, which is why I know each colleague of mine is going to be on their own path and figuring out how to say the things that they need to say to their constituents. But I believe there is so much more that connects us in what we want and what we think is needed to get to a two-state solution than what divides us. And I'm trying to create a space for that conversation to happen because I don't want anyone to think that I feel like I get it exactly right. Yeah. I'm doing and saying what my constituents need to hear from me. And that has been my guidepost through this whole thing. And it is incredibly emotional. We all want to end the suffering. And I do want viewers to understand that, whether your member has said it in a way that you want them to say it or on the timeline that you wanted to say it, I want to reassure everyone we all want the same things. We're just perhaps differing on what we think is the best strategy to get there.
Congresswoman Becca Balint, Democrat from Vermont, on MSNBC Thursday night. Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, posting, "Everyone should be able to see the video my colleagues and I saw of Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack against Israel. People need to understand what we're dealing with and that this is a fight of good versus evil." Congressman Lawler attached a video of his appearance on the Sean Spicer Show.
As a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and certainly a member of Congress, it's important to show our solidarity and support with the state of Israel. My district, the 17th District of New York, I have one of the largest Jewish communities in the country. And so, I certainly felt it was imperative to be there. We met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, with Defense Minister Gallant, U.S. Ambassador Jack Lew, as well as families of the hostages. And so, going through that and having our discussions both with the Israeli government as well as the families, it was imperative that, the United States stand firm and resolute. We watched a 21-minute video, raw footage of the terrorist attacks on October 7th, and it's devastating. It is just brutal. Hamas terrorists killing innocent women, children, babies, with glee. Do you think that more people should see that video? I saw Penny Nance from Concerned Women from America was at an event the other day at the Israeli embassy here in D.C. She went and witnessed it, and you could just tell she was so moved. Do you think that footage should be released to everybody? I think it should be released to the public. I do. Obviously, it's heartbreaking for the victims' families. Certainly, if that's released to the public, but I honestly think people need to understand what we're dealing with. This is a fight of good versus evil. Sean, on our way to Tel Aviv, we had to stop in London because we didn't have military plane. We had to fly commercial, and the State Department wouldn't allow us to stay overnight in Israel. So we stayed in London, and we went and toured Churchill's War Room while we were there. And, I thought about the lead up to World War II and the Holocaust. And, it really reminded me we cannot be Neville Chamberlain in this moment.
Congressman Michael Lawler, a Republican from New York, on the Sean Spicer Show. In response to a U.S. request, the director of the Israeli National Security Council says the council has approved 2 tanker trucks with fuel to cross from Egypt to Gaza each day to be used to power water and sewage systems to, as he put it, prevent the spread of diseases in the Gaza Strip. And from the New York Post, this story, the White House has denounced those sharing Osama bin Laden's letter to America as an insult to the innocent victims of the September 11, 2001 terror attacks, as TikTok vowed to erase all mentions of the madman's propaganda. The White House spokesman Andrew Bates said there's never justification for spreading the repugnant, evil, and anti-Semitic lies that the leader of al-Qaeda issued just after committing the worst terrorist attack in American history. That reporting from the New York Post. Washington Today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Congressman Michael Guest, Republican from Mississippi, chair of the Ethics Committee, introduced a resolution in the House today to expel Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York. This comes one day after the Ethics Committee's report that found, quoting the report, a complex web of unlawful activity involving Representative Santos's campaign, personal, and business finances. Congressman Guest, in a written statement, says evidence discovered by the committee is more than sufficient to warrant punishment, and the most appropriate punishment is expulsion. Congressman Guest was interviewed on Thursday by Fox News radio reporter Ryan Smells.
And what was it? What was the piece of evidence in there that stood out to you and ultimately made the point to you that he needs to be expelled?
Well, to me, it was a totality of the evidence. I can't look at one particular piece alone and say this piece in and of itself. But when you start stacking the pieces together, again, looking at just the multitude of fraud that Mr. Santos committed I reached the conclusion as an individual member that now due process has been complete. There's been a thorough investigation, months of investigation by the Ethics Committee, almost 200,000 pages of documents reviewed, numerous interviews conducted, that now we've passed that due process point, and it's time for members of Congress to make a personal decision as to whether or not they feel the evidence is substantial for his removal.
Congressman Michael Guest, Ethics Committee Chair on Fox News Radio on Thursday. His expulsion resolution he introduced today could come up for a vote when the House returns after the Thanksgiving break. Expulsion from the U.S. House requires a 2/3 majority vote of all members. It's happened only 5 times in U.S. history. Congressman George Santos posted on X Thursday night, "I will continue to fight for what I believe in, and I will never back down. What the Ethics Committee did today was not part of due process. What they did was poison a jury pool on my ongoing investigation with the Department of Justice. This was a dirty, biased act and one that tramples all over my rights." Press conference November 30th at 8 a.m. on the Capitol steps. I encourage all members of the press to attend. Happy Thanksgiving. That statement from Congressman Santos. The newest member of Congress is finishing his first week in office. Gabe Amo from Rhode Island, a former White House official in the Biden and Obama administrations. He won a special election to replace David Cicilline, also Democrat, who resigned. Congressman Amo was sworn in on Tuesday and then spoke on the House floor about being the first black congressman in Rhode Island's history.
Reverend Marlon Van Horn was elected to the Rhode Island General Assembly in 1885, making him the first black person to serve in the state legislature. Just think, Reverend Van Horn was elected as a black man nearly 2 decades after the end of the Civil War. In an 1887 sermon, the Reverend said, "I believe the day is coming, is not far off, when in the Commonwealth of Rhode Island, the stomping ground of soul, liberty will become the home of the free and the land of the truly brave, the home of the free where fair play in all walks of life will be accorded." Those words are at top of mind for me today. Reverend Van Horn's dream and the dreams of those who have called Rhode Island home across generations allow me to stand before you today. And while we have not arrived at our final destination in this project of our democracy, I am optimistic. As a Rhode Islander, it's easy for me. After all, our state motto is hope. It is hope that led my parents to come from West Africa, my dad from Ghana, my mom from Liberia, to pursue opportunity in the greatest country in the world. But this is not just my story. It's a Rhode Island story. It's an American story. And that shared story is why today I am proud to be the representative from Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District. And what is beautiful about hope is that it cares not about your race, your religion, your gender, or where your ancestors came from. This belief has inspired people who arrived in Rhode Island from Italy and Ireland, Portugal and France, Dominican Republic and Haiti and Colombia, Armenia, and yes, countries in West Africa, and so many places in between. And I, of course, must acknowledge those whose family branches extend from the native tribes of our shores to the settlers who came for religious freedom, to those who did not choose their journey because they were enslaved people, but whose hope persisted nonetheless.
Congressman Gabe Amo on the House floor on Tuesday after taking the oath of office. The House now has 434 members, 220 Republicans, 212 Democrats. There's one vacancy in Utah's 2nd Congressional District. That'll be decided in a special election November 21st. Congressman Alex Mooney, Republican from West Virginia, posting a beautiful morning in Washington as the Capitol Christmas tree has completed its journey from the Monongahela National Forest. Can't wait to see it decorated. The 63-foot tree arrived via 18-wheeler truck and was met by James Kaufman, director of the Capitol Grounds and Arboretum for the architect of the Capitol.
Lighting the Capitol Christmas tree has been a holiday tradition since 1964, and it's one that we are proud to be part of. This year, we're honored to have a Norway spruce from the Monongahela National Forest in the great state of West Virginia. Thank you, West Virginia. Woohoo! I'd like to thank the United States Forest Service for finding and providing this beautiful 63-foot tall tree for the United States Capitol. This year, the tree comes from the Greenbrier Ranger District, home of the very first Capitol Christmas tree that was provided by the Forest Service in 1970. For more than a half a century, the Forest Service has been an incredible partner in making sure that we have the perfect tree to serve as the people's tree. And we are happy to host a West Virginia tree once again. This year's tree is nicknamed Waltham Tekwi, which means bright tree in the Shawnee language. Today, we will set the tree into the west front lawn, and our Capitol Grounds and Arboretum team will work tirelessly over the next several days to make sure that the tree is lit with thousands of LED lights and beautiful handmade ornaments from the Shawnee tribe and the surrounding West Virginia community. Thank you to everyone involved who helped make this tree's journey to the United States Capitol a success. We truly appreciate your efforts to make this a grand success. We are grateful to have an endlessly wild and wonderful Capitol Christmas tree that West Virginians and all Americans can be proud of.
James Kaufman, U.S. Capitol Grounds Director, today overseeing the arrival and directing of the Capitol Christmas tree. It will be decorated with over 5,000 ornaments and tree skirts made by West Virginians and about 5,000 LED lights. The lighting ceremony is 5 p.m. Eastern, November 28th. Congresswoman Carol Miller, Republican from West Virginia, has been posting what she calls the 12 days of West Virginia's Christmas tree journey to the U.S. Capitol. Day 3 had this information. The tradition of the Capitol Christmas tree was started by Speaker John W. McCormick in 1964. Thanksgiving holiday travel has already begun for many, although most will be traveling next week. AAA expects 55 million people to go at least 50 miles from home for the holiday. 45 million of them will be driving. Transportation Security Administration is preparing to screen 2.7 million airline passengers next Wednesday alone, the day before Thanksgiving. Lisa Farbstein, a TSA spokesperson, was asked on a new TSA podcast about how to make the security part of your trip smoother.
So what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making when they travel?
I think probably the most common mistake people make at the checkpoint is that they're bringing oversized liquids, gels, and aerosols. Mm-hmm. So if you can spill it, spread it, spray it, pump it, or pour it, then it needs to be 3.4 ounces or smaller and fit in a 1 quart-sized bag, 1 bag per person. We call that the 3-1-1 rule. 3.4 ounces, 1 quart-sized bag, 1 bag per person. And you're like, okay, Lisa, where are you pulling 3.4 ounces from? Well, that's 100 milliliters, and that's the international standard. So people think, why 3.4? It's the international standard, and that's why. But we see people bringing beverages, whether that is an early morning energy drink or that cup of coffee, or whether it's a bottle of water because everybody wants to stay hydrated. And so we see lots of people bringing liquids, gels, and aerosols. But that also includes things like hair gel, peanut butter, maple syrup, so some food items as well. But, oh my goodness, the amount of hair products, toiletries such as shampoo and conditioner and toothpaste and cologne, hairspray, shaving cream, and all those items can go oversized, larger size, in a check bag. So consider if you really like to travel with your large shampoos and the like, then just put it in a check bag and you're good to go.
What happens to most of those liquids? Do they get thrown away?
They get thrown away. They all get thrown away. Yeah. Now, people also bring other prohibited items through a checkpoint, and you want to say, but like you might want to know why. Why are you throwing away these? Well, why can't people bring these oversized liquids, gels, and aerosols? And that's because of the liquid plot that was uncovered. I think that was back in the early 2000s, maybe like 2006 or so. And so the idea is there are liquid explosives, and we want to make sure that people are not bringing, something of that magnitude through a checkpoint and onto a plane. But the other common things we see are knives. All kinds of knives.
Yeah.
So when I wake up in the morning, I go to work, I put on a wristwatch. But some people, for work, will take a folding knife and put it in their pocket or hook it onto their belt because they use that for work, or they know it's a handy tool that they use regularly, and they forget that perhaps that they're going to the airport. And so we see lots of knives, but all kinds of knives. Folding knives, fishing knives, hunting knives. We see pen knives. We see Boy Scout knives that are on keychains. I know I have lost a few of those. Before I worked for TSA, two of those I lost. So I no longer keep a knife on my keychain. And but every kind of credit card knives, which are the size of a credit card, fit in your wallet. Hey, they're great tools. Just leave them in the glove compartment.
Yeah.
But every kind of knife you can imagine. And they get boxed up and saved, and they get turned over to the state. And then the state can dispose of them as they like. And sometimes that means they sell them and they keep the profit. TSA makes no profit. We're happy to have them deal with it.
Lisa Farbstein, TSA spokesperson for the Northeast region, on a TSA podcast called Capital Runway. She also said that when air passengers take along their pets, sometimes things go very wrong.
We see people who accidentally put their dogs and cats through the X-ray machine. They, are in these carry-on bags, that have holes in them so that the pet can breathe. But to a TSA officer, for the most part, they just look like duffel bags.
Right.
And if the person, is not familiar with the process, sometimes they accidentally send it through, and then the TSA officer sees the X-ray and is like, "Oh my gosh, hurry up, get it out of there." No, that's not going to really hurt the animal,
Still,
once and done. But the only individual who should be X-raying your pet is the vet.
Free X-ray.
So what happens is when you do have your pet and it's in a carry-on, you're bringing the pet onto the plane, is you take your pet out of the carrying case. And so in the case of a dog, you would carry your dog through, or if it's on the leash, you walk it through the metal detector. They're going to swab your hands, and they might have to do a little pat down on the pet, like around the collar area or the vest, if indeed the dog triggers an alarm at the walk-through metal detector.
TSA spokesperson Lisa Farbstein. The account at FAA News on X, formerly Twitter, has this: "Oh my gourd, Thanksgiving is here. We're forecasting a peak of 49,606 flights on Wednesday, November 22nd. If you're flying somewhere, we hope your flight is gravy. Carve out some time to fill up on tips to help you prepare." And they include a link. Again, that's at FAA News. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 1, NASDAQ up 11, S&P up 5. President Biden posting a photo today of his signing into law the bill passed this week by Congress to extend government funding. And he writes, "Last night I signed a bill preventing a government shutdown. It's an important step, but we have more to do. I urge Congress to address our national security and domestic needs, and House Republicans to stop wasting time on extreme bills and honor our bipartisan budget agreement." The bill extends funding at current levels for some federal agencies and programs until January 19th, and for the rest through February 2nd. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. It's free, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.